Welcome to another Intro to Game Design tutorial. Hey, I'm Jerry from Bliz Studio, creator of the Apple featured game Trixel Rocket. So what are we going to be doing in this demo? We are going to start to take a look at player health. So we need to kind of figure out what a player health system is going to look like, be able to apply that to our player. We need to be able to have the enemies kill the player, and if that happens, we need to be able to blow up the player, and we also need to reset our game. And if you're enjoying this tutorial series, again, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and that little bell icon down there so you know when the next tutorial is available. And if you're ready to get started, let's go. So here we are in Photoshop. We need a few little graphics that we're going to use for the health of the player. So I have my kind of game screen set up. I need to go ahead and just add a little bit of UI, and we'll just add 3 little hearts. And then what we'll do is we'll have each heart that's removed. Once we've removed those 3, then we'll do a game over and we'll do a UI for that. So we need a couple different things for that. And I want to go ahead and just create a very simple little heart graphic. So let me go ahead and just add a new layer here. And remember, in Photoshop, if you name your layer as .png, .jpeg, .gif, and if you have under File, Generate Image Assets checked, it will automatically export those files as whatever the dot name is. So in this case, I'm using PNGs, and so every time I save, it'll automatically resave every layer that's in there that's a .png or .jpeg. So in this case, I'm having PNG files. Okay, so here's my 1920 by 1080 screen size, and we can kind of see the size of the enemy, the size of our ship, the size of our bullet. I need to go ahead and plan in a UI for some hearts that are going to be up in the corner. And we do have the score that's up there that we have in the game. So let's pop over to our game real quick. And you can see where that's going to go. And I'll also put the hearts up there as well. I don't want to have UI all over the place, just because when the user's playing the game and they're kind of concentrating on playing, you know, where the enemy's at and where I need to move, they don't want to have to be looking at where's my health, where's the score, where, you know, they don't want to be looking all over the place. I kind of feel like UI should be kind of all in one spot so they can take a quick glance at that UI and gather a lot of information, what my score is, what my health is, all that kind of stuff. Instead of having to look all over the screen for it, it's in one spot. Okay, so let's go back into Photoshop real quick. I know that I need to create a couple little hearts up here. And here's another little trick for Photoshop. A lot of people don't know this, but I like to use this quite a bit. Whenever you're zoomed in, you don't know what the size of something is. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll make a duplicate window of the one I'm working on. So if you click on Window, and you go to Arrange, and then towards the bottom, you'll see that there is New Window for, in this case, background stars.psd. If you click that, I now have a duplicate of the version. So I can have one that's zoomed in and one that's zoomed out. And if I undock this, so I'm gonna just grab that tab and just pull it out, I can now have both of those open at the same time. So as I'm drawing on one, I'll see it on the other. Which is a great tool. So I'm gonna go and, actually I'm gonna undock both of these. I'm gonna have one be on part of the screen and then the other be on the other part, just so I can see both at the same time. So again, they're exactly the same window, just one zoomed in and one's not. So what we're going to do here is I want to make sure I'm in the upper left-hand corner, which I am. And again, I'm going to try to keep with that angular theme. And I'm not doing this exact, it's just kind of eyeballing, but I'm going to create just a little bit of an angular heart. Something like that. And then we'll go ahead and create a color. I'm going to make this a little bit on the orangey red side. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm on a new layer. I'm going to fill it with my foreground color, and there's my heart. I'm also going to create an outline for that. I'm going to do that on a separate layer because I want that as a separate graphic. So I'll call this heart.png, and I might change that to UI-heart. There we go. And then I'll add a new layer, and I'm going to call this new layer UI-heart outline.png. Okay, so I'm going to have that. Now I have that heart selected still, so I have that selection. So if I go to select and then modify and expand, then what I can do is I can make that line from being this big to being a little bit bigger. And then I can just do a stroke on that line. So then it's going to be the same as my main heart. So let's go and let's expand it by 3. And that looks okay. And then I'm also going to add a stroke. So I'll go to stroke. So under edit and then stroke. And I'm going to change this to be white. Now I don't necessarily like to do like pure white. I like to do a little bit of an off-white, especially when it's on black, just because when you have the contrast of pure black and pure white, it's really high contrast and it's hard on the eyes. So it's better to have just a slightly off-white color so it's not as intense on the eyeballs. So you can see it's a slight, very, very slight gray. And I'm going to click OK. And then I've got the option of where that line is going to be created. So I have the little dancing ants line. And you can see in the stroke, I've got 3 options: inside, center, and outside. So if it's on the inside, the stroke that I create would be on the inside of that line. If it's centered, it's going to be centered on that line. And if it's on the outside, it's going to be created on the outside. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create it on the outside. And I'll click OK. See what that looks like. Here's the version that we have on screen, and that's probably looking a little bit on the big side. It's not too big, but I can go ahead and downsize it in the game. Normally I don't like to do that too much, but I think the downsizing will be fairly minimal. So I think we're okay. So I have those 2 graphics. I'm going to go ahead and save. And then here we look at, we're in the folder that my Photoshop file is in. And again, because I have that generate image assets on, you can see that here's my UI heart and my UI heart outline. And those were automatically generated for me just because I named the layer as .png. So there we go. So I need to go ahead and get those in my game. So let's go ahead and go to my Unity file. So here in project, again, we want to save all of our UI or all of our sprites in our sprites folder. Now here's where we want to start to kind of stay organized. Because these are UI elements specifically, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. So I'm right clicking or control clicking on sprites, creating a new folder, and I'm going to call this UI. And then I'm going to stick the sprites in that folder just so that's where all my UI graphics are going to go. Okay, so let's take and grab those 2 graphics. I'm going to drop those into UI. And here they are. I'm going to just double check to make sure everything's okay. They're exactly what I want. Perfect. Okay, now I can start to take a look at adding those graphics to my UI system. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and create a new UI. So in my hierarchy, I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to create a new UI canvas, and I want this to be its own canvas. Again, even though this UI is going to be kind of with the score UI, I'm going to have it be its own separate entity so that I can keep track of it separate if I need to turn it on or turn it off, do that kind of stuff. So I'll call this UI-health. And I'm going to move that up into my score area. And I do think I'm going to go ahead and, just for organization's sake, I'm going to move both of these UIs into the UI label. And then I can always close this if I want to. I'm going to do the same thing with my level manager. This is where we put our level manager, and then I have my game manager's empty game object. I'm going to go ahead and just stick my level manager inside of that. So again, we're trying to keep that hierarchy as clean as possible. Okay, so I'm back to my UI health. Now I know I need those 3 hearts up there, and there's a couple different ways we can apply this or do this, but I'm going to go ahead and just simply add these as UI images. And I want to go ahead and just with that image selected, under the inspector, you can see there's an image component. I want to go ahead and drag the outline into the source image. So here we now have that sprite, and it's a little bit on the big side. By default, it's just when you drop one in, it's like 100 by 100 pixels, and we can now go ahead and just scale that down to whatever size we need. I'm also going to go ahead and do another version. So let's just name this first. So heart outline. And then I want to scale this down. So let's go ahead and move it into place. Oops. Let's go ahead and move this into place. Kind of get it around the size that we want to. And I'm going to go ahead and left align it with the score. And maybe scale it down just a touch. And that looks pretty good. Now I can go ahead and just duplicate this a couple times so that we now have 3 versions of that. And I'm just going to use my move tool and only on the x-axis. And I want this to be fairly even. So I just kind of eyeball that, grab that, and just kind of move that so that they're equal distance from each other. Okay, so I now have the heart outlines, and yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now I can go ahead and do the same thing with the hearts. So another UI image, and that kind of drops that right in the middle of my UI. And let's go ahead and grab one of our hearts, drag it into that source image, and here we go, here's our heart. I'm going to go ahead and move that up here and then scale it down as necessary. Get it to, it's in the center of one of those. Yeah, around there looks okay. And then again, I just want to duplicate so that this is, there's 3 of these. And I'm going to undo that. So I first want to go ahead and name this before I duplicate. So let's go heart 1. And I'm going to have a heart 2 and a heart 3. Now the reason I'm naming those as heart 1, heart 2, heart 3, and I didn't really worry about that with the heart outline, is because the heart outlines are always going to be there, but the hearts I want to turn off. And so that way I can have them specifically named and then turn them off by name. Okay. So first I need to go ahead and then move these over. So heart 2 should be right there. And then heart 3 right there. Cool. All right. So now we need to go ahead and start to look at setting up a health manager. So just like we set up our level manager, I'm going to do the same thing and have a manager that's going to manage my health. Okay, so what that's gonna do is we're gonna try to keep all of that in one spot. So I'm gonna, under game managers, I'm gonna create a new empty game object. The only task for this is that it's containing the FSM, the finite state machine, that's going to control all the health of the game. Okay, so I'm gonna go dash health manager. Okay. And then we need to add an FSM to it. So I'm going to right click and add FSM. Now I definitely want to make sure that I name this FSM instead of just having FSM, because every time we create a finite state machine, a Playmaker finite state machine, by default it adds FSM as the name. But we want to be able to target these specifically as opposed to saying FSM, let's say in health manager. Okay, so I'm gonna relabel this as health manager, and that way we know that particular FSM is all about health. Okay, cool. All right, so with that done, we need to kind of set up a global variable. Now again, what we've set up so far in our global variables is kill count and score. Okay, so those two are being managed by our level manager. We need to go ahead and set up another global that is the health of the character. Now in the case of this, we want to set up the health as 3. Now we can set it up as anything you want, but in this case I'm having it set up as 3. So I want to go ahead and set up a global variable of the health for the character. So I want to create a new variable. So I just clicked, so I didn't have one of these others selected. So I'm going to create a new variable, and I'll just call this health. And I want it to be an int versus a float. Again, an int is a number, a series of numbers that includes a decimal point. And then a int is whole numbers only. So we only want 0, 1, 2, and 3 in this. And so we'll click add. Then with that selected, we want to go ahead and set the value. So right off the bat, we know that we want the health to be 3. So we're going to start off with 3. So we want to go ahead and put that number in there. So now we can then reference that. And the idea is that when the health goes to 2, we want to remove one of the hearts. When it goes to 1, we're going to remove another one. Now when it goes to 0, then it's game over. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our FSM. Now, the start state, I want to go ahead and have that listening to what the health of the character is. So I'll just go ahead and label this. So I set that as listener. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to listen for something. And that something is if the enemy has touched our rocket, okay? Or whatever kind of enemy that we have set up. So we do have our enemies. So let's go into our enemy prefab. And we have those as a tag of enemy. So we're going to listen for that tag. And then that tag, when it hits our player, we'll know that something's happened, and then we can trigger some other events. And that's going to be updating our UI, removing the health from 3 to 2, so on and so forth. Okay, so we know we have that set up. Let's go back, and do we have our rocket as tagged? We do not. So we need to go ahead and set that up as a tag 2. And by default, there is a player tag in the inspector. So we can go ahead and have our rocket as player. So we'll go ahead and set that up. So we do have a rigid body on the player, but we do not have a box collider. So we can't have our enemy touch our character because we don't have a box collider on there. So we need a box collider 2D on our character and the enemy. So that we know the enemy has one because we're able to kill the enemies, but we don't have one on the player. So we need to add that component. So I'm going to go ahead and click add component. And this is off screen for you, but I'm going to choose box collider 2D. And it's saying that there's a conflicting component. And that's because we have on my player, I currently have a rigid body, and that needs to be a rigid body 2D instead of just a rigid body because we're dealing with 2D sprites. So I need to go ahead and change that real quick. So it's saying I can't do that. So let's just take a look at our rigid body settings real quick. I have a mass of 1, not using gravity. That's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and just take this off real quick. So let's remove this component. That was a mistake on my part. I'm gonna go ahead and add a rigid body 2D instead of a rigid body. And then let's see, mass of 1, gravity, we want that to be 0. Yep. And then everything should be good. Okay, so now we need to go and add our box collider 2D. And here we go. And it's not saying we have any problems with that. The next thing that we need to look at is I do have a new problem, and that's saying that I don't have a rigid body component. So in my velocity for my player, it's saying, hey, you don't have a rigid body. Well, I'm using a rigid body 2D now. So the thing that I need to do is to change from a set velocity to a set velocity 2D. So they act the same, but they're for different two types of things. So one's for a 3D object and one's for a 2D object. So I need to set velocity 2D here. So let's go and we're gonna swap this out. Set velocity 2D. So you can see here's the option for that. I'm gonna go ahead and just drag that down into my state. And then you can see that I'm setting up the X move as my X value. So I can do the same thing here because I have that and I wanna use that. And then I can go ahead and just delete that. So hopefully that should take care of everything, and now we've got everything set up. So we do have a box collider 2D on our character. We also need to make sure in our box collider 2D that we have is trigger. So that way now both our enemy and our player can touch, which will then trigger the health event, okay? So we've got that set up. We had to correct a few things, but that's okay. That happens. And so let's go back to our health manager. Okay, so we're gonna be listening for when those two characters touch, the enemy and our player. So we need to do a trigger 2D event. So I'm gonna drag that down in my state. So we're gonna be listening for those two things to happen. So we're not listening for the owner. We wanna listen for a specific game object. And that game object is our rocket. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag our rocket down in there. So on trigger 2D, and we wanna collide. So when the player has collided with the enemy, so we have that tag in there, then we wanna send an event. So we're gonna go ahead and create a new event. And I don't have an event set up. So let's do an event called remove health. Again, these are just names that you create. I like to try to name them so that there's something that I know what it means, okay? So I have that event in there. Let's go back to our state. So I wanna send event remove health, okay? So then it's saying, hey, you don't have a state that contains this transition. So let's go ahead and click, and then it adds that transition over here. And of course that transition doesn't go to another state. So we need to go ahead and set up that state. So I'm gonna move this over just a touch and add a new state. And what do you think we're gonna call this? We're gonna call it remove health. Okay, so we now have that state set up, and we can go ahead and just drag our transition from remove health to the remove health state. So this is the event, and this is the transition, and then we're transitioning over to remove health. So we have to kind of determine what we want to happen. So we know we want to remove one heart, and then we also want to remove one of our health numbers there. So we're starting out with 3 and we want to remove 1. Well, we don't know where our number is at right from the beginning. So we can set up a couple different ways of accomplishing this. So one would be to do compare. So if we're at 3, we can send to one event, and then that'll turn off one of the hearts. Or if it's at 2, we can send it to a second event, and that's going to turn off that second heart, and then so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and set that up. So here we're going to remove health, and then in this we're going to check to see what the number is. So here we're going to do an int compare, and there we go. In my recents I have that. I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to do 3 of these because I'm going to have 3 different events. So if our integer, and that's what we're going to set up, and we have that as a global of our health. So if that equals 3, then we want to send it to an event that's going to remove that third heart and then remove 1. So let's go ahead and let's change the name of this from remove health to remove health check. So if it's equal to 3, we want to then send it to another event. So we're going to set up an event and we'll call this remove 3. And we'll go ahead and set up another event, remove 2. And then we'll have the last ones as remove 1. Okay, so we're going to remove the first one, we're going to move the second one, and remove the third one. So I'm going to have those set up as 3 different states. Okay, so here I'm going to add those states. So if our health is at 3, we want to remove 1. So we're going to do the remove 3. That's the first heart up here. So we're going to do a transition. So remove 3, and we'll send that to a new state. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to copy this action, paste it down in, and then have another one. So if our health is at 2, we want to send that to remove 2. And we need to add that transition. And then I want to do one more in here. And if our health is at 1, we're going to go remove 1, which is going to then essentially game over. Okay, so we need to add that transition. Okay, so here we're checking to see if what our global health is. So if it's at 3, 2, 1, or 0, well, at 0, we're just going to end the game. But here we are setting up and we're sending each of these to a different transition. And then we need to set up the states that those transitions go to. So we're going to add a new state. So I'm going to have this state as remove 3. And then I'm going to change that or drag that transition over to remove 3. And then I'm going to set up another state. And this one's going to be remove 2. And then drag that transition to that one. And then one more. And we'll call this remove 1. And there we go. Okay, so these don't have any actions in them just yet, so we need to add what those actions are. So in our remove 3, what we want to do is to turn off the first heart that's up there. So what we're going to do is to activate game object. So activate game object. Okay, and we're going to turn off that heart. So it's saying, hey, what game object do you want to turn off? So we're going to specify the game object. So this is heart 3, so we're just going to drag that in there. And then on our activate button, we want to turn that off. So that's going to turn off that heart. And then we need to also remove 1 health count from our health, our global variable. Okay, so we need to do a set int value. Okay, and the value that we want to update is health, and we're going to set that to 2. And we don't need to do every frame because we only want to do it once. And then we'll do a finished event. So add a transition of finished. So once it's doing the activate game object, which is turning off that heart, we set our health to 2. Then we're going to go ahead and just loop right back around to our listener. Okay. All right, so we've got that set up, and let's rearrange these just a little bit. Okay, now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and easily just copy these actions and paste those into remove 2. Okay, so the heart that we want to remove is going to be the heart 2. So we're going to change that one out. And so again, it's deactivated. So we turn activate off, and then the health, we want to change from 2 to 1. And then we also want to add a finished transition, and we're going to have that then go back to the listener. And then once that's done, let's go ahead and finish the remove 3. So we're gonna go and paste that into remove one, and we're gonna take the third heart, heart one, oops. We're gonna take heart one, drag that in there, and we wanna deactivate it. Okay, and so we don't need to actually set the int value for this last one. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. So we're deactivating that last heart, and then what do we need to do? It's game over, right? So we need to add a UI of game over, and then we also need to blow up our player. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and first add that finished transition and go back to our listener. And so currently right now it's just turning off that last heart, but we need to do a couple other things. We need to blow up our player, and then we need to add a game over UI. Okay, so let's go ahead and just add the game over UI real quick. I wanna keep my hierarchy organized, so I'm gonna add a new UI canvas to UI. I wanna right click or control click and create a new UI canvas. And again, I'm gonna label this UI dash game over, and then we need to kind of determine what exactly that looks like. And let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and add a new UI panel. Okay, so this is actually a graphic that then kind of goes over top of the whole thing, and I want to change what this looks like. So currently the color of this panel is white, and then it's a semi-transparent. I'm gonna go ahead and change the color of this to be black, and it's gonna be semi-transparent. So we're gonna go ahead and just leave that. And then I also need to add some text on it that says game over. So let's do this. Let's go UI and Text Mesh Pro. And we'll change the text in here to game over. And again, you should spend a lot of time designing this. I'm kind of doing this really quick. And let's go ahead and bold that text and make it a lot bigger. Let's go font size, and let's pump that up. And then I'm gonna change the size of this. So let's just drag this out. Again, I'm gonna take this to the width of the UI so that we know that this text is gonna be centered, and then I'm gonna go ahead and click alignment of center, so we know it's in the middle of the screen. And then the other thing that we wanna make sure of, because we have several UIs on our screen right now, and they're all rendered at the same plane. So we don't know exactly the ordering of these, and I want the game over to be on top. So this is where we need to think about our UIs and the sort order for those. So this is the order at which the camera renders them. So we've got the game scene, then it renders the UI on top. And if I have them all default as 0, they're all gonna be rendered, and we don't know exactly which one's rendered first. So we want to set the sort order. So the higher the number, the closer it is to us. So we know that we want our game over to be on top of the others. So we need it to be a higher number. So in this case, we want to, with our UI canvas selected, our game over, we're going to do a sort order of, let's say 10, just to kind of give us a high number. Okay. And then you just saw that when I moved that from 0 to 10, it's now in front of the other UIs. And now we can actually control on the panel, like how transparent or opaque that is. And you can see it kind of like fades out everything else on screen. Cool. The other thing that we need to add is a reset button, right? We want the player to be able to play again. We don't want them to just like be done and never be able to finish or play the game again. So let's go ahead and add a button as well. So we're going to go UI and UI button, Text Mesh Pro. I love the Text Mesh Pro. So we'll call this button dash reset. And we have that in there. And we also need to change the text. And I'll call this reset. And that looks okay. And then I just need to move it where it needs to be on screen. So I'm just going to move it down underneath. And that looks good. Okay. So let's go back to our health manager real quick. So what I'm going to do is on this remove one, we actually need to spawn that UI. So by default, that UI, we want that to be off. So I'm going to deactivate that game object. Okay, so it's not on. So then when we do reach the 0 of our health, we're going to go ahead and activate that game object, turn that game object on. So here we've got activate game object, and that is deactivating that last heart. So in this case, we want the game object that we want to activate is our game over UI. So I'm going to drag that down into my specific game object, and I want to check the activate, which then turns it on. And then we should be pretty good to go. And so let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and give this a test. Now there's something we haven't fixed yet. We haven't actually set up that reset button, but let's go ahead and just give this a test as it is. So if I play the game, hopefully if I did everything right, we should be removing 1 heart every time our player gets hit. And then once it reaches 0, it's going to spawn the game over UI. All right, so let's give this a test. And my player isn't moving. What the heck is going on? So let's pause this real quick and go to our rocket and set velocity. Here's the problem. So I swapped out set velocity to set velocity 2D, and I have that all set up right. The only thing that I didn't do was to check every frame. So I want to check every frame that this thing is moving. I'm listening for key inputs. And if every frame is not checked, it only listened to it once on 1 frame, and then that's it. And then that's why my player wasn't moving. So hopefully this should make our player to move. And then, yeah, player's moving. So cool. I've removed 1 health. I removed 1 more health, and boom, there we go. We've got game over, and that's working exactly the way we want it to. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to also go back to my health manager. I want to add a shake, right? Boom, you know, something happening on screen. So let's go back to our health manager, remove 1. We want to, we set up in our main camera a shake event, and we did shake small, shake medium, and shake big. And let's go to that here. You can see here's shake big, here's shake medium, shake small. So we want to call to this shake big so that we shake the camera a lot. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we're gonna go back to our health manager. We know we want to do a shake big. What we're gonna do is to send an event by name. So we're gonna send an event by name. So we're gonna drag that down in. And we don't want that to be on self. We want it to be on a game objects FSM. And then what game object that is. So let's specify the game object. And we want that to be the main camera. So I'm going to drag the main camera down in there. So the FSM that's attached to that, we can go ahead and just add that by name. So I'm going to just go to my camera real quick. Shake big is the event that I want to call. And then let's go back. And I just copied that, and then now we can just paste that in. So shake big. There we go. Cool. So we've got that happening. And then the other thing that I want to do is to blow up the character. And then of course I need to stop my enemy objects from spawning and also turn off my rocket. Okay, so let's do this. So I'm gonna add an explosion, and I'm gonna do that with a particle effect. I have a particle effect that I'm gonna go ahead and just use that's on the enemy right now. So I'm going to go to my enemy, and here's my particle system, and that is, if I turn that on and play, you can see it's like a burst. I'm just going to copy that. So we'll copy this and turn that back off. And then go back to our scene, and we're going to paste that into our rocket. Drag that up to our rocket, and we're going to relabel this to PS-explosion. And it's currently way up there, and I want to move that down to where my character is. So I'm going to go ahead and just go into position and do that as 0 and 0. And then that kind of centers it down to where my character's at. And then I want to turn that off. Then go back to my health manager. So here we are activating or deactivating the last heart. We're spawning the game over UI. We are also sending the shake event to our camera, which is going to shake. shake big, and then we also need to turn on that explosion. So we want to activate that game object. So I'm just going to copy this action, paste that down in, and we want to activate the PS explosion. So I'm going to have that activate on. And then the last thing that we need to do is to kill our character. And I'm going to take and let's see. I'm going to go ahead and just do that here too. I'm going to stop our spawner. So we're going to deactivate our spawner. So turn that off. And then we also need to turn off our character. So let's do an activate for that game object as well. And turn off rocket and deactivate that. Okay, so hopefully this does everything that we want. So let's give this a test real quick and see what happens. So boom, that happens. We removed one heart, we removed a second heart, and removed the third one, and we got the game over. Now I'm noticing that I'm missing something else too, and that's a camera shake that is on each of the times when we get hit. So let's go ahead and just like we have send event here by name to the main camera, I'm going to copy that and paste that in both of remove 3 and remove 2. So let's do, instead of shake big, we're going to shake, oops. So instead of shake big, we are going to do shake medium, I think. Let's go back to our main camera just so I make sure I get the name right. Go ahead and just copy that name. A little bit easier to do that. Just make sure we have things correct. So shake medium, and then I'm going to copy this and then put that into this one as well. So let's give that a test. So we're getting the camera shake, we're removing a heart, and then we're getting our game over. Now the thing that I didn't see is the explosion. So what's happening is that if we go back to our remove 1, you can see that we're removing the activate game object of rocket. So we're turning that rocket off, but that particle system is attached to that rocket. So what we need to do is to do this just a little bit differently. I can have that explosion spawn and then deactivate. So what we want to do is I've got the PS explosion activating, but all this happens kind of instantaneously. So I might do a little bit of a wait before it deactivates the rocket. So let's do this. Let's go wait. So here we want to do a little bit of a wait, and we want that to happen before we deactivate the rocket. I'm going to wait 1 second. That's perfectly fine. And then after it does wait for a second, then it's going to do the activate or deactivate the game object of the rocket. Cool. So hopefully this then works. Boom. Boom. And then one more. Boom. Yeah, there we go. So that worked. Cool. All right, so there's one other thing that we need to do, and that's to reset the game. So we have that button set up, so we just need to add an action to that button. So again, we need to figure out where that button action is. And what I'm going to do is create another manager, and we'll call this reset, because there might be other instances where we'd want to reset the game. So let's go ahead and create a new game object under managers. We'll call this dash reset game. Okay, and then we need to figure out what we want to do. Well, first I want to do add an FSM. Okay, and so we'll just leave this start state as it is. I'm going to go ahead and create another event that's going to be a global event, and we're going to call this game reset, and that works for me. And then I need to go ahead and add a state, and here we can do a global transition of game reset, which is going to add a state that has a transition of global transition of game reset. And we'll go ahead and just label this as game reset. So it'll start on this first state and just sit there. And then it's, you know, when we call the game reset, then we can do stuff. Okay. So what do we need to do? One, we need to turn back on our enemy spawner. We need to turn back on our player. And then we also need to reset our health to 3. We need to turn both or all 3 of those hearts back to on. And then we should be good to go. So in this reset, let's go ahead and we need to activate our game object of, let's go. So I need to turn the heart on. I need to turn my game over. So it's almost everything that I have here, but just in reverse. So I'm just gonna select all these actions. Let's go back to our reset and paste. The only one that I don't need is send event by name to our main camera because we're not doing a shake. So we can go ahead and just remove that one. So we're turning our UI game over off. We're going to, we don't need this explosion. Enemy spawner, we need to turn that back on. We don't need the wait. We need our rocket back on. And then we also need all the rest of the hearts back on. So let's go and do all 3 of those hearts. So let's go activate game object, and the game object that we want to activate would be our health, and we want to do heart 1, heart 2, and heart 3. So I'm going to copy these, paste those down, and then do one for heart 2 and one for heart 3. Okay, so we're turning on turning off our game over UI. We're turning the spawner on. We're turning our rocket back on. We are turning hearts 1, 2, and 3 on. Then the other thing we need to do is we need to take that global health, turn that back to 3. So currently we have that set as 0 because we've gone down to 0, and now we need to set it back to 3. So let's go set int value, and we need to choose the global variable of health, and we want to change that back to 3. And there we go. That should be the reset. Now we need to go back to our health manager, and we're going to call that FSM when we've hit our button. So I'm going to go ahead and just add one more state in here. So add state, and this is where it's just going to be listening for that button. So we're just going to add our reset button text in there for our state. And instead of going to our listener for re-listening to health, we're going to then go to the reset button. In this, and we just want to listen to when that button is hit. So here we are going to take that button, our reset button. We're going to drag that down as a state, and we want to, on the button, do a UI button on click event. Okay, so when anybody clicks that button, then we're going to call to that global transition, and we want to send an event when that's done. So we need to set up an event and reset. So I have that transition. We need to add that transition, send event. So when somebody's clicked on the button, okay, so we're going to add another state. So it's just going to call that reset FSM. So we need to reset, so reset game. And here we're just going to call to that FSM on that other game object. So we can just do a send event by name. That game object that we want to send the state to is the reset game. And then the state that we want to call is, let's see, game reset. So let's go ahead and just copy that, make sure we have that right. And we'll paste that in. And then when finished, so we're going to add a transition of finished, then we're going to go ahead and go back to our listener. Okay, so here's kind of the logic of what's happening. So we're currently listening to anytime the player is hit. If it's hit, then we're going to go to one of these. So we're going to check to see if we have 3 health, 2 health, 0, or 1 health. and then we send to the appropriate state that then does something. We're removing 1 health, we're resetting the int value of our health to the next level down, and then it's shaking the camera, and then it's going back to the listener to re-listen for those events. Once it gets to the last one, then we're going to turn off the last heart. We're turning on our game over UI. We are shaking the camera big. We're spawning that explosion. We're also turning off our enemy spawner. We're waiting for a second, and then we're turning off our rocket. And then once those things are done, we're going to our listening for our reset button on our game over UI. We're listening for that to be clicked. When it's clicked, then we're going to go to this reset game, which is then calling the reset game manager. And then in that, it's going to turn everything back on and put our health back to 3. So hopefully, if we did everything right, this should work. So let's give this a test. Boom, we've lost 1 health. Getting a little bit of screen feedback, and there's one other thing I think I want to do, but hopefully there we've got a game over, and hopefully if we hit reset, boom, we're reset back to the game again. So we're back to doing exactly everything that we want. So I want to do one more thing, and that is to add on, let's see, I'm going to add one more UI just because I want to. Canvas, we're going to add a new UI canvas, UI dash, let's call this screen flash. Okay, so I'm doing a little bit of a screen shake, but I also want to flash on the screen just to kind of give the user some more feedback that something's happening. So screen flash, we'll add a panel to that. So UI and panel. Let's go to our UI real quick. So you can see that by default the panel is white. I'm going to change that to kind of an orangey reddish color maybe. And yeah, that's good. So I'm just going to have this just flash on for a second and then turn off. So let's go back. I'm going to go ahead and first turn that UI off and then go back to our health manager. So every time we get hit, I want to just turn that on for a second, then turn it back off. So let's go, and again, we're doing the activate game object. So let's just copy that and go down to the end here. The game object that I want to activate is my screen flash. So I'm going to activate it. Then I'm going to wait for just a very small short period of time. So let's do a wait. And the time period that I want to do, let's just say maybe 0.2 seconds. And then we want to turn that back off. So we're going to turn that UI back off. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the second remove 2. And then on the third one, respond to the game over, so we don't need that flash anymore. All right, so let's give this a test. Okay, so my screen flash isn't happening. So let's see what's going on here. So I think what's happening is that all these actions are kind of happening close to the same amount of time. And so it's really not giving me the turn on, wait, and turn off. So I'm going to separate the turn back off into a separate state. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new state. So I'm going to call that screen flash off. And then what I want to do is here I'm turning on the screen flash, then I'm waiting, and then I'm going to copy that right there. Turn the screen flash back off. I'm going to put that action over into screen flash off. And let's see. And then in the wait, I'll go ahead and call the finished. So here we're going to do the same thing in the second one as well. So I'm going to take that, delete that. And then when it's finished, the wait is finished, then we're going to go to, instead of here back to the listener, we're going to go to screen flash off and do both of those. And then I'm going to add a transition of finished. Once it's done turning the screen flash back off, then we're going to go back to the listener. Okay, so we're adding a little more complexity, but we're kind of trying to organize this so we know exactly what's happening each state. Okay, so hopefully this should work. And boom, there we got our screen flash. And now that 0.3 seconds actually is a little bit long. And then hopefully the third one, we are going to do a game over. And come on, where's an enemy? Boom, there we go. So we've turned our game object back off. And then we're sitting here listening for a reset. We click the reset, it goes and it resets our game. And now we're back to playing again. And there we go. There's a health manager with a game reset. So we covered a lot in this particular demo. And what we created was a health manager. So we're keeping track of the player's health. We're removing 1 health every time we get hit by an enemy. And then once we reached 0, we then triggered the game over UI. And then we have in the game over UI a reset button. And then when the user clicks that button, we go ahead and reset the game. And again, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and that little bell icon down there so you know when the next tutorial is available. So what's up next? I think I'm gonna spend a little bit of time just adding a little bit of polish to the game. Until next time, keep creating.